wrong either.
All right, gentlemen, let's get on to our sponsors, and then we'll pick up with the Gemara, all right? Year of Learning, Dr. Paul Koningsberg, in memory of his brother, Dr. Sam Koningsberg, Shimon Ruven ben Labush, Ed Goldberg's cousin, Nisan Hara, Nisan ben Fardosa. Paula and Bob Bromberg, in memory of their dear friend Julian Smith, Yehuda ben Yisrael. Malka Mann, in memory of her family, murdered in the Holocaust. Harav Tzvi Hirsch ben Shlomo Yaakov, Sarah bat Ephraim, Yisrael David ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Ephraim ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Adia bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Miriam bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Pesel bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shalom ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shlomo Yaakov ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shmuel ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch. Many friends of Dr. Marvin Blush, Moshe Shalom ben Yitzchak Halevi, friends of Toby Paris, Sarah Tova bat Yisrael Dov, friends of Malka Levi, Malka bat Yosef, friends of Avi Gitler, Avromeir ben Shimon, Cheryl Sher, her children and grandchildren, in memory of her uncle, founding member of BRS, Dr. Israel Brook, Yisrael ben Arav Akiva. Marcia Fetterbush and family, in memory of her husband, Dr. Uriel Paul Fetterbush, Uriel ben Arav Shimon, and friends of Joe Wolf, in memory of Joe Yosef ben Yisrael. Continuing with Month of Learning, starting with Adina and Michael Kirshner, in memory of their parents, Florence and Nathan Kirshner, and their friend Harriet Friedman. Tova and Leo Zimmer, in memory of her mother Henya bas Harav Beryl, and her father Aaron ben Yosef Mordechai. Perry and Jill Meltzer, in memory of his mother Malka bas Baruch and his sister Golda Leah bas David Halevi. Carol and Josh Sanborn, in memory of her father Yoshua Shia ben Moshe Yehuda HaKohen. Stanley Presser, in memory of his mother Leah bat Yehuda, his mother-in-law Golda bas Avram, and his wife Ruchel Mincha bas Moshe. Ruth Burian, Judy and Edward Boyne, in memory of Ruth and Judy's mother, Hadassah bas Azriel Zelig for Miriam, and Father Yitzchak ben Yosef for Esther. A Week of Learning by Anne and David Klar, in memory of her mother, Gittel bas Yaakov, by Sam and Ramona Levine and Charlie Gelfenstein, in memory of Sam's mother and Charlie's mother-in-law, Livsha bas Avram Shammai, and Sam's father and Charlie's father-in-law, Yechiel Michal ben Arav Alexander Ziskin. Today is the third, and therefore is a day of learning, plus Torah Fund, excuse me, by Gary and Toby Greenstein, in memory of his mother, Henya Rachel bas Shlomo. We also had yesterday a day of learning by Mel Grossman, in memory of his brother, Tzvi Hirsch ben Menachem Manish. May the Shemas have an Aliyah, Kranka, Rafia, Velti, Yashira, Shemot, Leah, and L'chol B'nai Yisrael, a good Geben Shtiyah.
Hey.
Marvin, I'm going to ask if you could stay on at the end of the Shir for a couple minutes.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. All right, gentlemen. Morning, Harvey. Morning, everybody. Mendy. We're on Ayin Gimel. We're 3 lines down from the top of the Amud. Shchato shelo le'ochlav, where our Mishnah said, what about the individual who slaughtered the Korban Pesach on Shabbat, not for people who could eat it, not for people who were tahor, in other words, they were tameh, or for somebody who was uncircumcised, etc., etc. Okay? So the Gemara picks up and says, Pshita, isn't that obvious? Kevan dahatam pasu, since it's considered already invalid slaughtering in any case, certainly on Shabbat, it's going to be invalid. Hachachayav. And so they're here in this case, that individual would be chayav to bring the chatas. So the Gemara continues, Mishum Datana Seifa, patur. But perhaps because they taught later, okay, in the Mishnah that one might be exempt, Tana Reisha Chayav, that they taught here, therefore, that they would be obligated. Maybe it was only a literary reason that they taught it, and not per se a halachic reason. Vaha nami pshita, says the Gemara. But here this is also obvious. Mishum dahatam, because when we're talking there about the offering, if it was done appropriately, kasher, it would be valid. Hacha patur. We might think that here, okay, where it's not valid, okay, maybe simply be exempt. Okay. Ela aide detana shchato shelo lishmo b'Shabbat, but rather, says the Gemara, since we see that it taught that it was slaughtered not for its appropriate intent. In other words, we said that could be the wrong gender, the wrong age, the wrong things like that, and it was done on Shabbat. Tana nami shelo la'achlav, that it was also taught in case it was done for those who could not eat it. Vehi gufa, and this itself, asks the Gemara, lamali, why then did we need to have to teach this part of the Mishnah? Mishum de kavae le'efluge Rabbi Eliezer v'Rabbi Yehoshua, in order to come to teach us and establish what the machloket was between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua. Now, we pick up with a new aspect of the discussion in the following. Amar le Rav Huna bar Chinena lebrei. Rav Huna says to his son as follows. Ki azlat lekame the Rabbi Zerika, when you go and travel and you appear before you arrive before Rabbi Zerika, by mine, ask him the following. V'divrei ha'omer mekalkel b'chavura patur. Okay, do we say that if one made some kind of a error, okay, right, and in regards to the group that had registered, okay, that do we say then that it's one is exempt? Shechato shelo le'ochlav chayav, that if one then slaughtered it for those who couldn't eat it, that he's obligated to bring the chatas. Matiken, is there any remedy to this? So his answer is follows. Tiken, okay? Yes, there is a remedy. Right? In other words, im alu, if nevertheless they brought this korban up onto the mizbeach, lo yordu, they're not permitted to take it down off the mizbeach. So let's continue with another example, says the Gemara. Shchato v'nimtza ba'al mum chayav matikein. If, let's say, they slaughtered the korban pesach on Shabbat and then afterwards discovered that it had a mum, wouldn't he have to be then bring a chatas? Is there any remedy? In other words, is there any way to say that that's not applicable? Tikain, yes, there is. It says, bedukin shva'in. Okay, right? That what we're talking about is that there was a remedy in the fact that the animal only had really a temporary blemish of the eyelid. Okay, va'aliba de Rabbi Akiva. And this goes according to the view of Rabbi Akiva, the Amar, who says, imalu lo yordu, that if they put that animal, okay, on the mizbeach for altar, again, they do not take it down off the altar. Okay. Now, one more example, says the Gemara. Shchato v'nimtzat treifa b'seiter. Okay. Let's say they slaughtered the animal and then afterwards they discovered that the animal was such unknowingly that it was going to die within the next 12 months. Okay? Patur. We would say that that seems to indicate that the individual would be exempt from having to bring the korban chatas, given it was slaughtered on Shabbat. Ha begalui chayav. But here, if it was aware, in other words, if one was clearly aware that the animal was going to die, then having slaughtered it on Shabbat, okay, he would be necessary for him to bring a chatas in that case. Matikain, is there any kind of remedy? Asks the Gemara. Tikain lahotzi midei nevela. Yes, says the Gemara, that the remedy is that he removed this animal from being in the status of an avela, which would automatically render tameh, not only other things, but the person having done the shchita. So the Gemara challenges this with the following braita. Matkif la Ravina. Ravina challenged as follows with this braita. Ha detanya. But here, isn't it taught in a braita? Hashochet chatat b'Shabbat b'chutz. One who slaughters a chatas on Shabbat, and they did it outside the temple precinct, la'avodah zarah, and they did it for the purpose of idol worship. Chayav aleh shlosha chataot, that then that person is guilty and subject to having to bring 3 chatas offerings. Mati came. Is there any remedy in this situation? Amar Rav Avira. Rav Avira suggests as follows. Shemotzio midei aver min hachai. That we can say that in that situation, the person, however, who did the slaughtering, removed the situation from eating a living limb. Okay, a limb off the living animal, in a sense, okay, which would have been a greater Isser. Okay, now we come back to our Mishnah. Shchato v'noda chule. Okay, so this section of the Mishnah was telling us that what happens if they slaughtered the Korban Pesach on Shabbat and then discovered, say, that the owners died. Okay? Take that example. Amar Rav Huna. Rav Huna says, Amar Rav, in the name of Rav, Asham shanitak l'reah. Say we have an Asham offering, okay? And it's been removed, it's been sent out to pasture. Okay? Normally that's the case. If we have an Asham for somebody, okay, and the person, the owner, dies, the greatest atonement is his passing. And so therefore we don't need that animal offering as an asham anymore. What do you do with it? We normally then put it out to pasture, okay, and wait, let's say, until it gets a mum, and then sell it to buy a new ola. Or theoretically, one could put the animal into a stall or something, lock it up, not feed it, and let it die on its own. Okay? So the Gemara, what? Yeah. So Gemara here is saying that they put it out to pasture. Shchato stam. If one slaughtered it in general, kasher la'olah. Okay? Then, okay, if that's the case, we could say that that animal might then be acceptable, valid, as a totally burnt offering. Alma, therefore this seems to imply, kasavar lo ba'i akira, This seems to give us the impression, I'm saying, that one does not need what the Gemara uses as the word akira, uprooting. What that implies is a change in the declaration as to what kind of offering it is. Does the person have to actually say out loud, okay, that this animal is no longer going to be this? Or if he says at least this animal is now the following, that is the akira. It's uprooting the animal from one status of korban to a different status of a korban, different kind. Ihachi, says the Gemara, ki, okay, if that's the case then, lo nitek, if the animal was not sent out to pasture, nami gzeira la'achar kapara, then perhaps here too, there's such that it's the decree that this could be done after atonement. Okay? Atu lifnei kapara. Therefore, this tells us that this perhaps can be accomplished and done before the atonement. So the Gemara now asks, Umina Tamra, and on what basis can you possibly say Tnan? Because we have a Mishnah that tells us, Asham Shametu Ba'alav, an Asham offering where the owners died, Oshanit Kapru Ba'alav, or the owners gained atonement through some other means. Yera'eh, right? Could be death, but could be another means. Yera'eh ad sheyista'ev, it should be put out to pasture, okay, until it gains a mum, v'yimacher, and then be sold, v'yiplu damav l'nedava, and its money then should be gone to purchasing a voluntary offering. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, according to this Mishnah, Rabbi Eliezer says yamut, that the animal should be put to death. As we said, put into a stall without any food and die by starvation. Rabbi Yeshua Omer, Yimacher v'yavi b'damav ola. Rabbi Yeshua says the animal then should be sold, brought and take the money and use it to purchase a ola, a voluntary burnt offering. Now, Gemara raises the following point. B'damav, if you're talking about its money, yes, and aval gufo, but the body of the animal itself, lo, that's not the case. Why? The gazar la'achar kapara, atu lifnei kapara, shmamina. That since this was decreed to be done after the atonement, at this point it comes to tell us that it's possible to be done actually before the atonement. And indeed, that's what we learn. Now, Eitive, but a Braita is brought by Rav Chisda to challenge the Rav Huna, the following. Shchato v'noda shemashchu ba'alim et yadam. Say that the individual slaughtered the Korban Pesach, and then afterwards it was known to him that the owners of the animal withdrew their names from that, let's say, registered group, right? And instead, okay, had registered with a different group. What happens? Let's see as we go to the next Amud, right? Atani ale b'chol. And this was taught in regards to a weekday situation. Ki hai gavna yisaref miyad. In that situation, says the Gemara, we understand, the Braita told us, that one should burn the animal immediately. I amart bishlema by akira. If you're going to say, however, that there's an agreement that one needs to uproot, change the status of the korban, Hai Pesach, and this was a korban Pesach that we're dealing with. V'kevan delit le ba'alim, and since now there are no owners, Havale psulo begufo. This would then be considered, and the animal itself, okay, its very nature now would be invalid, and therefore that would be the explanation why it should be burned immediately. Okay. Amtu lahachi yisuref miyad. Okay. There, as a result, then we come to the conclusion that it should be burnt immediately, as we said. Ella, rather, I amart, if you're going to say lo ba'e akira, that one does not have to redesignate the status of the offering. Meresha havale shlamim. After all, originally, the same animal that used for Korban Pesach was really originally a shlamim, okay? And could have been left in that status if you don't need to change it. Psulo mishumai. Then why would you say that it's now no longer valid? Simply, if you don't have to change the status, just consider it a shlamim that's a nidava. Okay? Mishum davar acher, says the Gemara. What then is the reason that we say that there's the invalidity here? Dekashachit la acher. Okay? Why? Because someone else slaughtered it. Tamid shel bein ha'arbayim. Achar tamid shel bein ha'arbayim. Because perhaps when it was slaughtered, what made it invalid was that it was done after the evening tamid. And we know there are not supposed to be any other offerings after evening tamid. Right? So what happened, said the Gemara? Ibur tsurabai. But don't we say in that situation, okay, that rather than burning it, okay, what we require is a change in the form of the sacrifice. In other words, the offering needs to be allowed to decay. And in that way, its form is changed. And once it's changed, then one could take the, so to speak, rotten offering and put it then in a place to be burnt. Okay? Ditanya, because we have a braita that teaches as follows, Zeh haklau, this is the general principle. Kol shepsulo begufo yisaref miyad. Whenever the reason for the offering becomes invalid in and of the offering itself, okay, because of the, right, it should be burnt immediately. Bedam, if there's a reason for its becoming invalid due to some act vis-a-vis the blood, in other words, remember we talk about the avodos, whether it be the catching of the blood, the transporting of the blood, the sprinkling of the blood, things like that. Ube ba'alim, or with regards to the owners, to uvar tsurato, we should let the form of the offering change, in other words, let it decay, v'yetzei lebeit hasrifa, and then take it out and bring it to the beit sreifa. Now remember, there were a number of locations that were called beit sreifa. One, okay, was right by the foot of the keves, by the altar on the grounds of the Azara. A second was outside the temple precinct, but still in Yerushalayim. And the third location was even totally outside Yerushalayim per se. Ella, rather, says the Gemara, lo tema shchato stam kasher l'shum olah. Okay, don't say, therefore, says the Gemara, that when one slaughters it in general, it's valid for the purpose of the olah. Rather, Ema, I would say, shchato l'shum olah kasher. Okay, but rather you should teach it that then it could be slaughtered for the purpose of a valid olah. Alma by akira. Therefore, this comes to teach us that in essence we do need akira, we do need the change of status from one kind of korban, one kind of offering to another. Now, the Gemara picks up and says, Ula Rabbi Chia bar Gamda, okay, who says the following, Da Amar, Nizrika mipi chavura va'amre. He tells us that there was a question, an issue from the group of scholars, and they said as follows, Kagon shahayu ba'alim tme'ei metim. Let's say, what about a situation where the owners had become corpse tameh? V'nidchin lepesach sheni. And as a result, therefore, they really want to keep that animal that they had designated as a korban pesach. But when that occurred, they said, fine, we can't offer it, let's say, now on the normal Pesach date. We'll hold on to the animal and wait another month for the Pesach Sheni and offer it then. What about that kind of a situation? Hi, hu deba'e akira. Okay, in this case, would we say that the animal needs change of status? Ha ba'alma lo ba'e akira. Or do we say in general that it does not need the change of status? Mai ikalamema. What are you going to say about that? El amar Rav Huna bered Rav Yoshua. Okay, he answers Rav Huna, son of Rabbi Yoshua, the following. Hacha b'mai yaskinen. What are we talking about in this situation then? Kagon shehifrishu kodem chatzot. Let's say that they designated and they separated that animal before chatzot. Umetu ba'alim achar chatzot. Okay, and the owners died after midday. Dahavale nir'eh v'nidche. Because in that situation, we would have had an animal that was fit to be offered that night, but it was put off because it didn't have owners. V'chol hanir'eh v'nidche. At any situation where we have an animal that was originally fit and then put off, shuv eino chozer v'nir'eh. We say in that case, the animal cannot, so to speak, return to a status of being fit and eligible to be offered. So the Gemara says, midihu, okay? Is this the only reason? Ta'ama hu'ela, okay? The Rav, but according to Rav, ha'amar Rav, as was said by Rav here, ba'alei chayim einam nidchim, who argues that living animals are not put off. Ela amar Rav Papa. However, Rav Papa says as follows, Ha'mani, according to whom is that view? Rabbi Eliezer he. That's the view of Rabbi Eliezer. The Amar who said, V'chein hashochet acherim l'shem Pesach, pasul. that one who slaughters other offerings for the sake of the Passover offering, it's invalid. Dahavele psulo begufo, because that is what he considered to be a invalidity, so to speak, in the very essence, the body of the animal. Ve'i Rabbi Eliezer he, and if that's the view of Rabbi Eliezer, chatat nami mechayev, then he's also going to be obligated, if he did it on Shabbat, to bring a korban chatas. The Rabbi Eliezer to'eh b'davar mitzvah patur, because we see that Rabbi Eliezer does not hold by the view that if one makes an error, even in the act of trying to do a mitzvah, he's not exempt. Okay? Which, remember, was the view of Rabbi Yoshua. Okay? So the Gemara comes back and it tells us the following. Ela tirgama Rav Yosef b'rei de Rav Salah Chasida. But rather it was explained by Rav Yosef, the son of Rav Salah Chasida, Kame de Rav Papa, in front of Rav Papa. Okay, whose view was this? He said, Hamani Yosef ben Chonaihi. Now, that was the view of a different sage, Yosef ben Chonai. Ditznan, as taught in the Mishnah, Yosef ben Chonai Omer, he says, Hanishchatin l'shem Pesach, those offerings that were slaughtered for Korban Pesach, u'l'shem chatat, or for the sake of a chatat, psulim, they are invalid. Alma, and therefore, psulo begufohi, that this invalidity is based on it being the, in essence, body of the animal itself. Umishum hachi yisoref miyad. And because of this, okay, we say it should be burnt immediately. Ubepature, and that therefore also one would be exempt. Okay, exactly exempt from bringing a chatas if it were slaughtered on Pesach. Savale ka Rabbi Yoshua. Okay, why? Because he holds like the view of Rabbi Yoshua, who since one's intent was in doing it for a mitzvah, therefore he should be exempt from bringing the chatas. Excuse me. Now, Rav Ashi is going to tell us the following. Amar Rav Ashi Amar, Rav, in the name of Rav, the Amar ka Rabbi Yishmael Benosha Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, who said it in the name of Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, to Tanya, teaching the following right. Rabbi Yishmael Benosha Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka Omer, he says, Im yesh shahut biyom. Okay, if there is enough time, okay, on the Erev Pesach, when it's occurring on Shabbat, okay, is what he's telling us. Leida imashcho ba'alim et yadehem, if the owners had removed themselves from part of that registered group, o shemetu, or the owners died, o shenitmu, or the owners became tameh, and the person still slaughtered that animal on Shabbat for the Korban Pesach, chayav, he is obligated to bring a Korban Chatas. And what should be done with that Pesach's quotes, Pesach offering? V'te'uvar tzurato. We should allow it to change its form, to become decayed. V'yotzei lebeit hasreifa, and then take it out to one of the places of burning. Ma'itama, what's the reasoning? Lav mishum delo ba'e akira. Is it not because he requires a change in designation, right, of the status of the korban? Mimai, on what basis do we say this? Dilma mishum de savarla kitana de be rabba bar abua. Maybe, on the other hand, okay, we're going to argue that he does not hold that we require akira, but instead he holds to a different view, namely the view that's taught in the Academy of Rabba Bar Abua, where they say as follows, the Amar, afilu pigul nami ba'e ibur tzura, that even a normal offering that becomes pigul, in other words, that was beyond its appropriate time, right, requires a change in form, in decay. Dialeif avon minotar, because we learn a gezerah shava based on the word avon from the example of notar, right? De'ilo temahachi, okay, because if you don't say that's the case, okay, nitma'u ba'alim, then the owners become tameh. My ikalamema. So what then are you going to say? Ha vadai by akira. Therefore, this implies that here certainly must require some sort of uprooting, right? Change of status. Da'amar Rabbi Chia bar Gamda, as said by Rabbi Chia bar Gamda, nizraka mipi chavura, as again thrown out, shouted out by one of the group, kagon shahayu ba'alin tumei, as in a situation where perhaps the owners became corpse defiled, v'nidchu lePesach Sheni, and it was put off for Pesach Sheni. Ella, but rather, mechavarta, it's clear, kedeshani meikara, as we answered originally, Yosef ben Chonai, that it's basically the view of Yosef ben Chonai, who therefore tells us that if it were done on a weekday, the offering should be burnt immediately, okay? And if it were done on Shabbat, since he holds like Rabbi Yehoshua, that one was involved in the act of a mitzvah, he does not have to bring a korban chatas. And that's where we are going to end for today. Okay? All right, tomorrow we'll pick up